if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Yeah. Give me all you got, don't hold it back. Yeah. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. Yeah. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. The love is too high. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, take now, bring me down, can't none bring me down. The love is too high. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Welcome, welcome, YouTube and community members to Community Conversations. I'm Khadija Williams, Senior Manager of Community and Family Engagement at Rocket Ship, and I am here with Harry Thomas, who is running for the shadow representative seat in DC. Thank you so much for joining us today, Harris. And I just put two names together of Harry. Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry about that. And glad to have you here for round two.
Well, it's always good to be back, and I also want to thank Rocket Ship because you have made an impact in the community I live in, and I'm also honored that you honored my mother with naming building on or the campus in honor of her. And I think that this is where the community conversation should start with groups like you that have a vested interest in changing our community, where it should start with change, and that's educating our young people and being impactful in our communities. And I think you have met those standards well. So I'm welcome to be here and welcome to discuss anything I can about this candidacy. And I know originally you asked me to come on as a candidate for Ward 5 Council, but I really, in thinking about what I was doing, looked at that race as, all that we do in our elected government is for naught if we don't get statehood, because everything we do goes to the Hill. And when it gets to the Hill has a up or down veto power of what our laws are. I know that as a former council member, and I know that in interference that they've done in many of the issues that relate to progressive or just common sense things that we want to do as a city to support our residents, um, becomes a political football because we don't have two voting senators and two voting congressmen. And so for me, it is very important that statehood becomes the primary focus of what our efforts are. And it's kind of ironic because it's common sense. We're fighting for something that this whole country was founded on. And if those who are elected to Congress and the Senate do not understand that, then we have a hypocrisy democracy. And so we need to change that. So thank you, and I'm here to do whatever you want and address any questions and concerns. And thank you for anyone who's listening. because statehood cannot be possible without you, without your involvement, without your pinpointing other people throughout the nation and putting political pressure on those to do only what's right for the residents of the District of Columbia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. And I would love for Mr. Perry to introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Scott Perry. I'm with the Edgewood Brooklyn Family Support Collaborative. Worked with you, Mr. Thomas, on the Brooklyn Manor Thanksgiving basket giveaway. Good to see you again, and thank you for your time tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the work you do. And that's one of the critical issues we talk about in my campaign. Is not just those kinds of health care and feeding our neighbors, but the gun violence and the stuff that you've been doing in intervention. And those laws even get impacted in what I'm addressing through this whole federal system that don't always appeal to our district residents. So thank you, man. And thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as you already talked about, you were running for Ward 5 Council, and that's why we originally had this conversation, and then you have since decided to run for the shadow rep. Can you talk about, for our viewers, why is it that statehood is so important for DC?
Well, it's the foundation of our democracy. I mean, it's real simple. I mean, if we went on this on common sense, we wouldn't have this conversation. We would be who we are. Most residents don't realize we had what was considered limited home rule when we were able to first elect our own mayor and our own council. But what most people don't realize is while we have those 13 members and that mayor, everything that's voted on in this city goes before Congress and the Congress Appropriation Committee to be discussed and decided on by the Congress. And so what that means is you as residents do not have a voice in the most powerful legislative body of the world, and the legislative body that stands for democracy. And so that's hypocrisy in its finest moment. Yes, we know that DC was, and so to help people that talk about this was the federal enclave, no one imagined that 700,000 plus people would live here in this city and not have the voice to vote. And we pay taxes more than many other jurisdictions, and we don't have control of our own destiny. So it's just a matter of fairness and equity. And honestly, what we fought and had the Boston Tea Party for, that's what it was. It was Crispus Attucks stood and got the first bullet taken to him. And we have a Crispus Attucks museum in Ward 5, and people don't even know that. And we understand those things, but we're not represented the way we should be represented and have that kind of representation. Point in fact is, if we looked at issues like the marijuana laws that we have that Congress people want to play with, if we look at basic things that just happened with when we were trying to fight COVID, and then people like Ted Cruz was trying to say that we shouldn't have mask mandates and we shouldn't have the safety precautions, and people, while we were able to record our numbers, I think our city did a great job and making sure our residents got tests. So yeah, our numbers showed because we were doing what was right, but we had people throughout the country trying to fight a public health crisis and use us as a stomping board for their political football. And so those kinds of issues can't be what we subscribe to, or nor can we allow it to happen. And honestly, I shouldn't even be having this conversation with you guys about having a shadow rep to lobby for statehood. It should be a common sense thing that should be put in place, but it's not.
Now, what does statehood look like for kind of like the average, like kind of Washingtonian like parent, especially, a family who is, low income, may have like kind of suffered from COVID, may have lost her job, may have been evicted from their apartment. How does statehood and this shadow work like actually like kind of support, families on that day-to-day level?
So, okay, if we were a state, and the simplest thing is your representation and what you vote for and the people you elect would be able to be your voice. Right now, we really aren't. We speak on local issues, we decide our budget, we decide issues for us. But again, everything has veto power when it goes to Congress. So the first thing statehood stands for is you will be a true, full-pledged member of our democracy. And I think that's what people need to understand. What my job is, because it's not statehood, is to be your lobbyist and to be your activist to ensure that statehood does come to the District of Columbia and we move beyond this place we're in. And so what would happen is we would have a governor. We would have, people always try to figure it out. We already have a kind of like a community-based, I'm an ANC commissioner, so we already have other kind of like a legislative structure outside of the city council. So you'd have a state legislature, and then you'd have local bodies, and you'd have more elected officials to represent you, and you'd have a bigger voice on the table. That's what it really honestly would be. And so for that working class citizens, when we vote on things like healthcare reforms, or for example, issues that got, for example, funding for abortions, whether you afford it or not, if the city decides that public health dollars could be made available for that, you don't have to worry about someone in Congress, because that's their political football in their district all the way in some other state saying that, no, DC can't have it. We voted on it because we know our mortality rate, infant mortality rate. We know the issues that affect our citizens on many issues. And so we have the voice and the right intent for our citizenry. And that's really what you're voting on. And that's what you want us to do. I'll use a prime example. What got me into this race was when we looked at the people who took over the Capitol, and how people don't understand that that was a terrorist act on our country. And when those 6 individuals got sent to our local city jail, now all of a sudden, because they were of a different ilk, a different background, they got special treatment where they were separated out of the population. They got notoriety for saying DC jail has been a problem for our, knew that. We knew that the conditions there were not suitable for the folks who were sitting there. But now all of a sudden, because you're of a different political class, a different movement, you were able to bring people there to start making noise about it. So if we were a state, we could have made some changes earlier. But there's a lot of federal intervention on things that we just don't have any power over, and we need to have that power as a city and become a state.
Thank you. And that's really helpful, because I feel like it's really important for, people to have context kind of for why like statehood is important, kind of why this work is so important. So thank you so much for taking the time to kind of.
I'm gonna give you one other point that I think you should know. We have the highest maternal mortality rate in the nation, according to data in 2016. So you're talking about people in your group. But we couldn't, if we want to apply funding to those things, somebody else can play political football to those things and not allow us to fund and correct something that we know we had that high rate of. And so when you're speaking to parents, healthcare, that's a big, big thing. My brother that's here with the collaboratives, he understands that, how those dollars have to get spent in our communities of need. I work with collaboratives every day. I work with them on gun violence. I work with them with returning citizens, trying to make sure that we do training and connecting people to things. But if we can't put our dollars where we want to help our citizenry and help organizations like the Edgewood Brooklyn Collaborative, then we're going to have problems forever on, because these are the people that are boots on the ground that can tell us the healthcare concerns that we have, can tell us where some of the gun violence issues are, and we want to fund them. We don't need to be a political football because somebody wants gun rights to now talk about we're too harsh on what we're trying to do to curb gun violence in this city. So that's really what it speaks to. It's life and death for us in many ways. Even the structure of, DC was at the forefront with this whole charter school movement back in the day, right? So it allowed different things to happen. And then, oh, by the way, people in Congress caught on and said, hey, that's a pretty good idea. But if we had that good idea, then why not make us a state? Why not make us do the things that we do and control our own destiny? That's what it's all about.
That's really, really helpful. And for people who are like, oh, he just decided to kind of go on to like do this shadow rep thing because there were too many people running for Ward 5. Like, what would you say to those individuals? You know how people be. Like, what would you say to them?
First of all, it was a much easier race in Ward 5 because I had to deal with one geographical area, a ward that I'm very familiar with. It really comes down to who can get their vote turned out in that election. Second of all, for me, shadow rep, there's no pay in that job. It's because it's what I love for this city and what I see. And I think it's a bigger platform that needs to happen. So anybody that thinks that, I wasn't running for a job, that's not why I'm running. I'm doing pretty good in my own businesses right now. I've restored my life. But what I think people need to understand is that sometimes you have to look at things, and I've been at the council and I understand how the council works. but I also understand that there's a bigger picture that we need to move forward and educate our citizens more. One of the things we've had a great deal of is turnover in population in this city, people who knew the statehood movement. When I first got involved in it, I knew the shoulders of people like um, Julius Hobson, who was a statehood advocate. I knew Josephine Butler and people like that. And people don't even speak of these names anymore. Walter Fontra used to have a network nationally where we targeted Congress people who were against statehood and got other people who were more friendly to our causes. And that's one of the things I want to bring back, because those are the things that we need to really.
Oh no, you're on. We can't hear you anymore. We can't hear you anymore. Your audio went out. Mr. Thomas, your audio went out.
Talking about
Okay, you're back in.
So
your audio went out for a bit.
My audio went out?
Yep, your audio went out for a bit.
So what I was basically in a nutshell saying is running for this job is about understanding that this is about democracy and the way we do government. That's the most important thing to remember from this. So that's why.
Thank you. And for those who are just tuning in, these are community conversations. And so the goal of community conversations is to ensure that those who are running for office are accessible to the community by kind of engaging in in-depth conversation with those running for office, ensuring that we understand as a community kind of like, who they're about, what they're running for, and what makes them tick. And thank you for joining us, for everyone who's just tuning in. And so there are a couple of questions that have been put on like some what's it called, some kind of Facebook groups. Before I get to those questions, I want to check with our panel of one, Mr. Perry, see if you have any questions, and then to ask if believe Miss Maria Jones, check to see if there are any questions that she has. But first, Mr. Perry, any questions that you have?
I have one question now. So I know DC has had the shadow senator role for a little bit over 30 years. What progress do you think the city has made utilizing the shadow senators over the last 30 years?
Well, it's interesting you said that. When I was on the council, I actually authorized the statehood function in the budget as one of the legislative initiatives I did as a council member. So I think we have now, one of the things we can say is I think everybody that is in elected office is on the same principled sheet of music about statehood. And that's very important, because at one point, I don't think everybody was driving or think it was important. Now, how we get there, I mean, I'm sure there are many people that have many ideas about this, but I always equate it to like being on the Beltway, right? The Beltway is you got many exits, but you can get to DC, whether you get off at Connecticut Avenue, whether you get off at Wisconsin Avenue, or whether you get off on University Boulevard. Eventually, it's going to lead you down into the city. So I think we just have to take all these collective thoughts. I think we've had some good leadership. I mean, I know Senator Strauss, I know Senator Brown, and the new person that currently sits in the seat. I remind people I'm not running against him. I'm running for the seat because I think it's important that we understand we need people that have a historical knowledge of this as well as a fundamental knowledge of this. So I think we're moving in a good direction when we can have things like taxation without representation on our tags. That sends a message to just those little cues to let people know. You'd be surprised when you travel. I know, you can travel someplace. Now, I didn't really know people lived in DC or people did this or how it works. People come here to see our capitals and our monuments, but then they get the real treat that we have communities, vibrant communities. We got Rhode Island Avenue Road. We got, U Street. We got all the things you want in the city. We got Nat Stadium. We got soccer stadiums. We're a real functioning, viable place that the citizens deserve to have full representation. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think leadership is moving in the right direction, but I think we have to really put up all or none. I think we're at a critical point right now. We have a congresswoman that's gotten, this thing to the floor, but now we have other people sitting up there talking about, well, we want to take away home rule because they're threatened by it. And why do they want to do that? Honestly, because they think DC is too democratic. And a long time ago, they used to think it was too black, So, I mean, let's be frank about why we've had these hurdles to overcome. So now in some people's eyes, I think we've become more of a acceptable city because we have got more diverse in our population here. But we still, no matter who lives here, we're people who are part of the United States of America who do deserve full representation that this government is supposed to afford to us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to check to see, Ms. Jones, if you have any questions. All right, post in the chat if you do. So one of the questions that I asked Ward 5 candidates is kind of like, what DC do you represent? You know, kind of thinking of Ward 5. And so for the shadow position, you wouldn't be representing just Ward 5, but all of DC. And so thinking about kind of the fact that, you know, you have such a long history, who do you see yourself representing, and how do you see yourself balancing kind of like new and old DC and kind of like all the demographic changes in a citywide role?
Well, first of all, anybody that runs for office has to have some things that they've stood for. You know, I've been blessed to be known as a working class council member in a working class family. And I think that I have been, I would put it to this. You have to have a delicate balance. A couple of things I know. As a parent, you know, people who have children want to make sure that they have the best possible opportunities for their children presented in the city. As an adult, we want to make sure that our adults and people who are of age to work have the best opportunities to work and are rewarded for their work. One of the problems I really have in the District of Columbia is looking at our workforce and our workforce development of opportunities for people, and making sure that those who come through our schools and other things. So when I was a legislator, for example, I was very supportive in making sure that the Firefighters Academy and Police Academy were put in place to look at high school programs to get our people on track for not just jobs, but careers. I'm doing that very much right now. I think also because of what happened in my political career and my enlightenment further, you know, I was one of the people that introduced legislation for ban the box on returning citizens. And not until I had a situation in my life did I realize, as much as we were doing to try and help those to get back on their feet, there's so much more that needs to be done. And so when you ask me who I represent, I think representation is a common sense approach. You have to look at what people stand on. For example, when I was on the council, I voted for same-sex marriage, which was a very controversial issue, but it was an issue of fundamental rights of people just to have the right to make their own decisions for their lives. And I think that's where government has to be sensible. And so I think when you look at that kind of stuff, I think you represent your whole constituency. Yes, most people who get elected may get elected. If you get elected by 51% of the vote, that means only 49% of the people weren't feeling you, right? But you still have to represent all of those people who live in this city and make sure you have a balance and listen to the concerns of people. And so when you ask me about representation, I think one, I represent the new and the old. You know, I'm blessed to have a wife who came here from California, who people could have considered an interloper, but she came. One of the things I always tell people is don't come to our city and not be part of our city. Understand its culture, understand its richness, understand, you know, don't make it because go-go's the thing now that is hot and happening. There's so many other genres that we have, that DC is made up of so many things. You can do so many things in this city and represent so many kinds of bodies of people. And so you have to have a critical thinker, someone who's going to be balanced in their approach and make sure that we do what's right for the overall betterment of our city.
I really appreciate that. And now one question, like kind of like speaking of kind of like returning citizens, one thing that was kind of posted as, you know, I was posting for these community conversations and advertising was an article that talked about your imprisonment for 3 years in 2012. And so, you know, this is community conversations. And it's like kind of what questions community asks, like, and it's like, this person was posting it, can't like ignore that. And so my question for you is, what have you learned from that? What have you learned from that experience? And how is that experience going to kind of help you as you, you know, as you kind of like continue on, like, you know, serving the city?
Well, I think the biggest thing is acceptance of responsibility. I think when things happen and people make mistakes, what did they do at that critical time in their life? You should look at that. And for me, it was accepting my responsibility and owning up to what happened. I didn't stand there and try to explain something away. I understood that what I did was technically wrong and that you have to own up to what happens. And as my dad would say to me, you know, somebody asked me when that all happened to me, what would your dad think? My dad, I said to them was my dad would be proud of me because I stood up and accepted responsibility and moved on because what I tell people is that, you know, it didn't just hurt me. You know, what we learned from those experiences is that there's a victim's impact statement, and my victim's impact statement was a community I served. I hurt and let down a lot of people. And so when you look at what I have been through and what I've done, that's why it's so important for me to understand reform for returning citizens because, you know, I'll give a prime example. You know, while I introduced the Ban the Box Act, which says that you can't ask on an initial interview or application that a person were they doing criminal time. Well, when I got in the federal system and I came back to the halfway house said I had to tell everybody, you know, that I was going out for employment that I was currently in the halfway house and incarcerated. And I'm sitting there as a former legislator saying, but we passed a law that said we didn't have to do that because what about the time? You know, when I was away, I actually got my associate's degree in divinity. I did time and I was doing CDL courses. And there's a lot of people like me. There's so much what I think untapped human manpower, and female populations get affected by it just as bad. And we don't talk about that in the prison system, what happens to breaking up families and all of that. So I think I learned a valuable lesson. And I think that, you know, forgiveness is part of what we do. You know, people have to judge you for what you have to do. I'm held to a higher standard and I get that. And some people may or may not forgive me. And I get that too. But I think, you know, we all have a redemptive value. I think people have to look at the whole of my life and what I've done. I've been blessed. You know, I currently coach at Washington Adventist University as a head coach of softball. And, you know, working with young people has been a beautiful thing for me. St. John's High School, I do some clinics and camps for them. I run the RBI program and working with young people. And I think a lot of those things is because I do what I love to do. You know, I do what I'm trying to do to help other people. And I think you just have to look at my life and see what I'm doing and give me a fair opportunity. And I think I won't let those folks down. I think the biggest thing you got to learn about people is, you know, did you step up? Did you stand up? You know, I always tell people, the people that are most impacted by me, you know, my family, you know, I put them in a perilous way. My mom, my wife, my kids, you know, while I went away, they had to stay home and suffer the brunt of my actions. So accountability is most important to people. And I think that's a lesson I tell the young people. I don't hide from it. I tell people I lead with it, you know, because I think people need to know because what has happened is I've become an inspiration of hope to a lot of people who have been in my situation I've met who are just ashamed of their lives. Things happen. You have to move forward. People know your heart, know your work, your commitment, you know, working with families during the COVID that didn't have food and making sure we got them fed, doing the Thanksgiving things we did in Brooklyn Manor. You know, those are the kinds of things you have to judge people. I didn't do it because I was trying to come back and run for office. I did it because it's right for our community. And so that's where I'm at, you know, and I have a legacy that, you know, when it's all written, said and done, people ask me, why didn't I write a book? Why? Because my chapter's not over, you know, that's it. You know, the other thing I tell people is my redemptiveness and believing in God and knowing that there's a higher power, you know, and I often remind people, I said, one of the few people, you know, that's truly in heaven was the thief on the cross, you know, that Jesus took with him. So if you have any kind of spirituality, you understand what that means. And so that's what this is about. This is a second chance, and I want to make the most of it. One of the reasons I ran is because I look at what is happening. You know, I'm very proud that I kind of set the seed with Marion Barry when we were doing this returning citizen stuff and people like Charles Jones and others. Now we have inmates throughout the country who can vote while they're incarcerated. You know, and people don't understand the value of that. They don't understand what was going on, you know, when you come back home and you can't vote. You know, I had never missed an election. You know, and then all of a sudden I come back home, I got to re-register, do all of this stuff. And so, you know, those are the kinds of things that make a difference in this stuff. So I don't ever mind that question and never run from it. And people have to, you know, judge you for who they're going to judge. But be mindful that redemptive power is powerful, and we should forgive people and do what they need to do and move on.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate your transparency. I really appreciate your approach. And it is very true that like the fact that if you look at the there's a school to prison pipeline, the fact that the majority of people who are in prison are black men, and the fact that many of them don't have the right to vote, that is just such a large like population of people who are disenfranchised. And the fact that you have to have your citizenship like basically kind of taken away, because that's like a very core thing, is the right to vote.
And I think one of the things I'm gonna say to you about that also, just think of it this way. So in DC, because we're not a state, we don't have our own prison. We have a small DC jail. Most of our inmates are sent throughout the country, and they have to do whatever. So imagine you're sent to, I was in Alabama, and you get to the inmate, that warden is just like, I don't care what they doing up there talking about you can vote. You know, they can deny you, they can creatively make sure you don't get that ballot on time because they control your mail flow. You know, and people don't understand that. There's still, even though we pass these wonderful things for these guys who are places and these young women who are places, it can still be hindrances, and you get these thought process people that are in the way that don't believe you have rights. They believe that they only see you as a criminal. They don't see you as a life, a husband, and things that you need to do, or a vital part of your community that was gone. So, you know, you gotta really look at this and see, you know, is it restorative justice or punitive justice? And in most cases, it's punitive justice. And if people really believe that you should do criminal time for something, so is there really, did you pay your debt to society because you paid that time and it went away? No, because when you get out, they still hold that thing over your head, even though you have earned up and done whatever the crime has been. You know, you go away and then you still come back and you got to fight the blight of, are you going to give people a second chance? So that's why I had to be up front and stand up and, you know, kind of take it for guys that don't really want to go through that. You know, mine was so public, you know, how can you run from it? I mean, what can you do? But just say you're going to put yourself out to serve and help others come over those barriers and relate to them, and also understand and make them, you know, one of the things I tell anybody that I run into that's been in that situation is, did you own up to it? And do you not understand that there's a community impact, that you impacted lives, and are you really sorry for what happened? And I think that's the first step you have to take.
It's really important. Like one of the things that I kind of like think about, and like that's really important, is like having people who have lived experience in positions of leadership. And that's something, especially thinking about like kind of like working with families experiencing chronic homelessness myself, and feeling like I have that perspective now, like seeing my mom have to suffer. That's been really helpful and important for me. But in terms of like how I, you know, serve as a leader, kind of in the work that I do. And one of the things that's kind of like still kind of challenging, there's a catch-22, because DC is not a state. People feel like these shadow like roles don't really have real power. That you can't really legislate anything, and that you're basically kind of like, okay, like let's have statehood. And so kind of like, what would you say to people like kind of like regarding this role of like, what kind of impact can you have in this role, especially with that catch-22 of like, okay, you don't get to like in the shadow role, you don't get to vote because we're not a state. Like, how do you navigate that? Like, is there some influencing that can happen? Like, what is possible in this role, like kind of before statehood, and what's possible kind of after statehood in terms of like what this shadow role could actually do?
First of all, our city walks and acts like it's a state already. So I think that people need to understand it's perceived power. You know, they always say power concedes nothing without a struggle, right? We have to act like we're a state, and we already are as a government. We function every day. We do all of the roles we have to balance as a government. You know, we do all of those things. But as citizens, are we really buying into the importance of it? Have we ever really had a march where all 700,000 people went down there, and just what would happen if that happened one day? You know, and not in an insurrection way, just stand out there peacefully and say, why are we not being treated as citizens of the United States of America? And I think so when people say that, you're giving away your power when you don't believe that that's how every statehood measure happened. They had shadows and then they moved over. Not every, but most of them. When you wanted to petition for statehood, you had somebody come. I think we have to have somebody that can touch people. For example, I was involved during the pandemic with helping the Divine Nine Plus work on a effort for Senator Warnock to get elected, and we saw that collective power happen when those folks get involved, because it started with Vice President Harris. When you saw the strength of our historically Black Greek organizations come to power and use their political power and muscle. And so that came from nowhere. So we have strengths that we don't utilize and help. And I think that we need to take those strengths and use them and make people understand. I think we need to bring it to the basic level of citizenry. I think when you look at the number of returning citizens that we have, empower them to be involved, empower them to be, conduits of change, because we can't stay where we are. We have something very unique in the city, the statehood party. Nobody has a party called the statehood party, and the statehood Green Party, to be precise. And they do work every day to try and change statehood. And so we got to get beyond the politics, whether it's going to be a Democratic, or a Republican seats. If that was the case, then they could take Puerto Rico, which is primarily on the Republican side, and give them full statehood and bring us both in, and we'd be back where we were with equal numbers. So let's not use that excuse, So if that's the formula you want to use, okay, you're going to get 2 Republicans from Puerto Rico and 2 Democrats, so that's an equal number, then give us both the statehood. So there are many combinations we could go through to make this work. But people got to understand that we have to have a voice. I'm very pleased that the new residents that come here are jump on it, because a lot of what's happening with them is they're coming from states where they had the power. It's almost like
oh no, we lost you. No, Mr. Thomas, we lost you again. So you left off at people who coming in, they had state power, and then they come back, and right. It's like they lose it. So that's where we lost.
Yeah. So yeah, people come here who have had the full rights and citizenship of the United States of America, and they say, "What? We're not a state." And so that's helpful to our cause. I don't fight that. We need them on our cause because they understand what it means to lose that. And I was saying, it's like being incarcerated. Once you lose your freedom, you really, sometimes it has to hit you over the head to understand what you have. And so when these folks come here, we need to embrace them, but we also need to bring along the citizenry that's been here. Because, you can't, if I went biblical, why did the people who got out of Egypt wander in the land for 40 years? Because they weren't ready to go into the new next place. And so we need to be ready as a city. The citizens need to embrace it. We need to move on with it and understand what it is. We need to have more educational programs and a lot of our stuff that even that are bettered. We have some now, but we need to have these young voices talking about, why are we not a state? Why are we not who we are? I mean, your young voices at your school need to understand, Mommy, it's not fair. Daddy, it's not fair. We, my friends in Maryland have someone that can speak for them and get results. In DC, we don't have that. So those are the kinds of things we need to do. Understand our power, claim our power, and move forward with that power.
Yep. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, because it's really, that's like really like an organizing principle, like really like, power, respects power. It's like we act like we have power because, like you said, we are functioning in a lot of the ways like a state. And so I really appreciate that, especially the perspective of how, new people are coming in, remind us like, this is what, we're missing. Because sometimes if you like don't have something for such a long time, you may not realize what you don't have. And then it's having outside people going, hey, this is not okay. Not to say that people who are living here are not saying that, but just like it's helpful to have people who had that experience to go, hey, this is not okay.
You're right, because I do a lot of sports psychology and psychology stuff, and it's like the Pavlov's dog theory, where you throw a rock at a dog long enough, all you gotta do is raise your hand, and that dog is just gonna run like the rock was coming, right? So if you've been in a state for so long, you start kind of believing that, well, it's not gonna change. I don't care what these people, but you can't never succumb to that. You have to be ready to go on to the next place. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're the one who like brought up the thinking. So thank you. Mr. Perry.
One last question for me. If elected to this position, what's your immediate strategy?
So one of my immediate strategies is to start using our national networks and our local networks and combining them and targeting some of these people that are going after statehood and not supporting statehood and making them accountable in their own districts. That's the strategy. It's not my strategy. I mentioned Congressman Fontrell when he was there. I used to be an intern and worked in his domestic monetary committee clerk's room, and he was very effective in organizing the Black Caucus and other groups to go after these folks who attack democracy and put it out there. I think we also need to have a very more restored, is democracy real in America? Some kind of campaign like that that brings people's attention everywhere else. How can you say we live in the greatest country in the world when we're denying our citizens? I mean, look at all these global battles and skirmishes that go on that are about democracy that we come to the aid of, but we have people in our own country that are not reaping the benefits of democracy. So I think that's one aspect of it. We have an office that has been put in place through legislative for our shadow congressmen and our shadow senators. We need to make sure that they are fully supported and have staff to get out the message and be the key voice of that. And coordinate these efforts a little bit more through the elected power that we're putting in people. We need to give these shadow senators and these shadow delegates a lot more support. And that's what I would fight for as well.
And my last question for you before we wrap up is what makes you unique as a person? Like what makes you unique? Like what's your kind of like your skill set that just makes you like this is what makes you good at what you do?
I'll give you what my wife tells me all the time. And it comes from my sport analogies. And she's like, you always seem to find the good in players. You see the possibilities. I think that's what makes me unique as a person. I don't care where I was when I was incarcerated. I saw the possibilities. I would write a journal every day, which I look at from time to time now, talking about where I'm going to be after this place. I never get stuck in a place. I see the possibilities. When I took my job coaching at Washington Adventist, I told the guys when they interviewed me that I wanted to build a program. I didn't want to just have a team. I wanted to build a culture of change. And I think that's what I've been, that kind of change agent. I was able to, when I was incarcerated, one of my proudest moments of incarceration was they didn't have a Black History Month celebration organized in the prison. So we got together and we had a month long of activities, weekly shows, weekly enrichment things that we did. And just being that kind of person, and no matter where you land, making the most out of your situations. And I think that's what I got that from my dad. I was fortunate to have a great mom and dad. And my dad was kind of like, no matter what life gives you, get up. You just got to keep going. And so I think that resiliency is what gets me, and seeing the good in people and seeing and having hope. And I think we lose a lot of that in this world. These young men and young women who we see out here and say, I don't know what's wrong with them. Well, when have you talked to them? And my brother can tell you, we go into these neighborhoods and sometimes when you speak to some of these guys, they're like, you're not scared of me? You spoke to me? I mean, it's just being who you are. You can't walk with a shadow of fear in this world. You can't walk scared to let something happen. You have to be able to motivate, love, and move forward and give people the benefit of the doubt. Now, does it always work the way you want it to work? No, it doesn't. But you always have to extend that olive branch and move forward. I think the other thing is I'm building new coalitions. I didn't just come back to the old coalitions that I had. I think there are a lot of people that get left out of the process, and we got to bring them along. And that's people make our country and make our world, make everything. And so we got to be inclusive of people. And I think that's my quality.
Thank you. And now for our last few minutes, would love for you to kind of just summarize, unless we check with Mr. Perry.
Mr. Perry, I got something for me.
Awesome. All right. Just love for you to kind of summarize, for people, if people watch the last few minutes of this, what would you like them to hear, and why you're running and why they should vote for you?
I think people need to hear that I'm running because I think that I represent being a voice for all people, being a voice of reason, and being a voice of getting people involved in the process. I would encourage people that, I'm in my last push for these final signatures. We have to get 2,500 signatures to get on the ballot. And I need to make sure that people, if they can help, that they would come to my site, harrythomasworks.com. And I use that because it's about working for people, working with people, making sure people are included. And I need people to help me get there. And so a lot of times people, you walk by them at the grocery store and they're like, I don't want to sign that position. I don't want to get you on the ballot. And it's like, take time. This is your democracy. One of the things I say about criminal justice is, one of the most important things about voting and being involved is now you can be a jury of your peers because you're in that system. But if you don't do these things, you don't. And I would ask people just to remember, like I remember, don't discount the least of those in our community, because there's so much that is being left on the table from people who can help us. And I'm encouraging people to be a grassroots, create a movement around this. I think that my whole slogan is working with and for people, and making sure that people are represented in the process. And people is not some people, it's all people. It's not about white, black, whatever. If you read about race was created to keep people apart. Let's be clear about that. Understand the psychological effects that we have in our world. See the good in all people, and let's make it move and make it work, and let us all work together. And I'm here also to work with those who have been carrying the banner for statehood, not to say they haven't, but I think I can bring another added equation from real life experiences that make a difference.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Thomas, for joining us, especially given you had to chair an ANC meeting like right before, and so it's real late. So thank you so much for your time and for participating in this conversation. And really appreciate talking to you. And
I appreciate you. And remember, I told you guys that I will do any kind of clinics and camps and be involved with your school community there at Rocket Ship. And so you need me, and we'll make sure. I'd love to do some stuff with your youth up there, because that really makes my life when I see these young people. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for the good work in our community. And as far as a collaborative, you're second to none. Thank you for all the work you've been doing, and thank you for always being in our communities and helping.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. You are wonderful. All right. And thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. DC statehood now.